Good night, everyone. Tonight, God is good and God is good all the time. My name is Irma J. Spiritual. Let me give you a word on tonight. And this is God promise to David. God promised to David. Now, God always make promise. He always make promise. And this story going to come from 2 Samuel chapter 7, 1 to 17. So after the king, now most of the time they're talking about David, but they're going to say king, and most of the half of the story, then they, and now and then they're gonna say David, but starting out they're just saying king, but they're talking about David. So after the king was settled in his palace, and the Lord had given him rest, from all his enemies around him. Now David is finally settled. Remember David, David kept on running from Saul, and he had also so many enemies. Remember that I put out Psalms on 27. They talk about all his enemies and stuff he had to deal with, so they ain't said it too much in the Bible. All we heard about pretty much that he constantly was running from Saul, but he had many enemies, they said. So David is finally settled in his house, you know, experience God gift, a rest from the surrounding enemies, you know. And so he said to Nathan, the prophet, he said, here I am. I'm living in a house of Caesar. Why the art of God remain in the tent? Now, see, all this long time, this tent, you know, been there since God rescued the Israelites, from Egypt. And when David took over king, he was supposed to do something with it. So this is David dwelling is stable, permanent, and secure, while the art, the symbol of God present. So Nathan replied to the king. See now, so David is saying we have this tent for a long time. We go from place to place and we got to drag this tent along. Because this tent was in Egypt. And so when God rescued the Israelites, they had to drag that along with him. And they had to drag Joseph's body too. So they're dragging Joseph's body, they're dragging this tent until they find a safe place. Find a safe place for it. So Nathan replied to the king, whatever you have in mind. He said, go ahead and do it. For the Lord is with you. Because see, David got this on his mind. Oh, he like, okay, we carrying around this tent. I need to build a temple. So he come up with the idea to build a temple. And so Nathan tell him, whatever on your mind, just do it. Because God is with you. So David perceived it was in his heart to build a house of God. He knew. Now, this was in David's heart. He's saying we traveling with this tent. Backwards and forwards. We going from place to place and we traveling this tent. So he says from my heart, to get a temple built, for God. So know it was a good work and fit, for a king to do. And my thing, this was a proper time, in he being encouraged. So but that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan and saying, go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord said. Are you the one to build me a house of the Lord? To dwell in. You know, so David told this to Nathan. So Nathan told this to God. So God telling Nathan to tell David. So you want to build me a house of God. Should you be the one to build this for me? So this message from Nathan that God was saying that he didn't want David to build a house for him. Now we learn that God did not want his temple built by water. He was a fighter. So David had made the plan and collected the material so that his son Solomon, could begin work on the temple as soon as he become king. So now God had promised to David that he will be the king over Israel, which he are now, but God don't want him to build the altar. God don't want him to build the altar. So his son Solomon will be building the altar. And see, this was David's dream. He dreamed of this from his heart, he said. So I have not dwelt in the house, from the day I brought the Israelite up out of Egypt to this day. I have been moving. Now, they're saying they have not moved this tent nowhere besides traveling from place to place wherever they go. So the Israelites up and out of Egypt to this day, they still have this tent. They were supposed to build a temple for it, and they have not. So from the place of they go from place to place, with the tent as many to wear. So now God feel like it's time. It's time for a temple, to have not have anything permanent going, for place to place. Don't have nothing permanent for this tent to go to, and it's going from place to place. Now, since he brought the Israelite up out of Egypt to this day, they still have that tent. So whatever I have, he said, move what the Israelite did. I ever said to any of their roots, whom I commanded to the shepherd, my people, Israel, why have you not built me a house of Caesar? Now God saying, all this long time you had this altar. How come you ain't built me my altar for? And see, he could have did it back then. When he did too much shedding blood and stuff. He could have did it back then. If God, he had that sin for a long time, for years and years. Because the Israelite had been out for years. So God also had told him, I command to shepherd my people. God telling him, I anoint you, to be king over my people. You was in the field, playing with the flocks and feeding them and stuff, but I took you away from that, and I said I was going to make you a king over my people, so, oh, excuse me. So now God feel like it's time. It's time for a temple, to have not have been anywhere permanent. Just been gone from place to place. Now, since he brought the Israelite up out of Egypt from this state, they're still holding on to this tent. Now, whatever I have moved, with all the Israelite had did, I ever said to any of their rulers, whom I commanded to shepherd my people Israel. Why you have not built me an altar? Now since David had been king over the Israelites, he had not offered to build a temple up until now. See, that's what God said. All this long time, you've been having this tent unpermitted, why you have not built none not? All of a sudden now, you visualizing that you want to build the temple. But God say, why you have not built it then? So the tent had been traveled with them under David's care ever since. Now God had brought them out of Egypt. So now then tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty said. I took you from the field, from tending the flocks, and I appointed you ruler over my people. Now God reminded him, God reminded him, God, and he's not gonna forget. Now he said, this is what the Lord Almighty said. I took you from the field. You remember when they went to David. David was in the field tending to the sheep and everything. God said, I took you from the field, tending your sheep, your flocks, and I appoint you to be king, among your brothers. Among your brothers, I anoint you to be a king over my people. You know, so um, so God, I don't know what's going on right now. Now God is telling him, I took you out the field. I took you out the field and brought you into the palace. You tended to the ox and sheep, so now you tended to my people. You know, and so that's what God telling him. So God reminds David of three things. God had done for David in the past. God took David from being a shepherd. You know, to be a priest, over Israel. God took him from following sheep, to be a prince over his people. Now, Israel now, God reminded David that what he did for him because David is sad he is not building a temple. So God had to go down memory lanes for him. Because, he feeling the type of way. He's in his feelings right now because he did all the visualizing of the temple. But God said, no, you can't do it. You know, so God telling him, I have been with you. Whatever you have gone, I have cut off your enemy from before you. So let me read that again. God has said, I have been with you whatever you went to. I have cut off your enemies, you know, from you, before you. But now I will make your name great. Now God said, I'm going to make your name great. God said, I took you out the field. I know you to be king over my people right in front of your brothers. He had about 10 brothers, and God had told Samuel, line them up. Line them up right now and anoint him king right among his brothers. You know, so God took him out the field and brought him to the palace. He said God called his people at the palace. He said, I took you out the field. So to be a king over my people. And I anoint you right in front of your brothers. So and then God said, because it took him 20 years to get in seat, to get in position. God said, I cut off your enemies, from among you. You remember he was running from Saul. He was running from his enemy. And also God said, I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to make your name great. You ain't got to worry about that. Everybody going to know who you are. And you're going to be great whatever you do. And everyone in the nation gonna know your name. They're gonna know what you stand for. They're gonna know your God. So God said, I'm gonna make your name great. And God said, like the names of the greatest men on earth. So that's what God's telling him. I'm gonna make your name great. And then you're gonna be standing next to the people that is greater on this earth. God said, the man that's greater on this earth right now, you're going to be standing next to him because your name going to be great. And see, that's what God said. Your name is going to be great. Not only going to be great, but you're going to be standing next to men that are going to be greater than on this earth right now. That's what God's telling him. You ain't got to worry about your name being a king. You're going to be a king. You're going to be a well-known king. So now God had established David. Give him rest over his enemy. Because he been a long run, 20-some years. And now he in position. He in position as, so he deserved rest. He been fighting for Saul, running from Saul, dealing with enemies every time you look around. God said, I'm about to give you rest. I'm about to give you rest. I'm about to make your name great. I'm about to settle you in your palace. He said, God also said he will make David's name great. Now this God promised. This God promised to David. So while David was running from Saul, he was running from his enemy. God said, I've been watching over you. God said, I've been watching over you. And when you didn't even know I was watching over you, all these 20 years, see, God was with him because, see, God made a promise to him that you're going to be a king over his people. And that never had happened, And so David really got frustrated, from running. He prayed to God. Said, God, you anoint me in front of my brothers. You told me I was gonna be a king. I'm running from cave to cave. When I'm gonna get in position? And so he finally got in position. But that long in those 20 years, God said, I was with you wherever you went. Wherever you went, I was with you. When Saul was running behind you, I was with you. When your enemies kept on running behind you, I was with you. When you was running from cave to cave, I was with you. I was with you wherever you went to. And he probably didn't even know God was watching over his life. You know. Um, so I've been with you wherever you went. Remember, David got announced in that sense. He was like 17 years old, but it took 20 years, for David to get in position. And God was protecting David that whole time. And he probably didn't even know. God said, I was with you wherever you went, you know. And so I will provide a place for my people Israel, and they will plant them so that they can have a home of their own, so they own Canaan land, but they been letting people own it and boss them around, acting like they're in slavery and going to pull them out of slavery. They don't need to keep going back into slavery, so that they can have their own home, no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning. So when God had first given them that land, they was like being oppressed, from other kings. They was letting people come on there and just took over the land, and God had to get them people out of there. So evildoers will not continue to oppress them, as they have done in the past, and I will provide a homeland for my people. Israel planted them in a secure place where they will never be disturbed. So this God people right here, God said, I'm building them a temple. I'm building them a temple. So they won't be disturbed. So God don't want them to be disturbed because see people just coming in the land, just taking all over and just oppressing them in their own land. You know, so and I have done, ever since the time I appointed leader over my people Israel. I will also give you rest, from all your enemies. The Lord declare to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. And so God is looking out for David. God about to build him a house for him, you know. And so God promised to David future. God promised to David future upon a place for his people so they won't be disturbed, so they have their own place. Now God will make a house for David, establish a kingdom and place for David and make David's name great. Everyone gonna know about David. So and when your days are over and you rest with your ancestor, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. So God making a promise to David. He said, your ancestors. He said, your own flesh and blood will establish your kingdom. So God keeping that kingdom established for David, even when he gone. And see, God good for making promise for after the day. After the day, look what he said to Israelite for Abraham. He making a promise to that throne. Like if something happened to David, his son gonna take that. His other son gonna take it. He said, God said, your own flesh and blood gonna be the only one gonna take leadership of this throne. So that's a promise he making to David. So these words from God to David, this is powerful promise, with the application right then and far from then. So now the other promise is in David's son Solomon, who would indeed build a house of the temple, for the dwelling of God glory. So he is the one who will build a house, for my name, and I will establish the throne of the kingdom forever. Now Jesus Christ, our David King, will never die, and nothing can bring him down from the throne. Now God promised that he would secure his home. Now God promised I will secure your home. He said I will be, his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod. We're by the men with frogly infliction human hands. So the details, of the relationship that God will have this coming to son of David. Now God said that he will be a father, to this man. And it is important that we remember when this promise is being made. We in a new covenant church are used to do an idea of God being our father. Now God talking about discipline, so he being a father, so okay, so your house or your kingdom, will endure forever. Before me, your throne will be established, forever. See, he making these promises. He making his promise here to David. He said your throne your kingdom or your throne gonna be established for life. And he said the kingdom will endure forever before your throne will be established forever. Now David requests, to build the temple, was good, but God said no. He said no to it. Now this does not mean that God rejected David. In fact, that God was planning to do something even greater. We see what God did with David. See, David was in his feelings at one time, because he had visualized this temple, but God gave him something greater. So God was planning to do something even greater in David's life than allowing him to build a temple. Although God turned down David's request, but he promised to continue his house of David forever. So he got something established for forever. So he don't have to keep on worrying about woo hoo hoo that he ain't built the temple. He got a good covenant and promises, from God that gonna last forever. So Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. So the Lord will raise up David, offspring, and the Lord will establish his kingdom, the kingdom that will never be destroyed. Now he will build a house for the name of the Lord, and a throne of his kingdom will be established forever. So even though um God God turned down his request to build a temple, but God still has something greater for him. You know, God has something greater. God established something for him forever. So he don't have to worry about when he gone. Silent supposed to take the seat after him. The other son supposed to take it, and it's supposed to go on and on. God said, "Your flesh and blood gonna be the only one sit on this throne." So that's all the word I have for you today. David wanted to build the temple. God said no, but God reminded David. David was a little sad, so God had to remind him. I took you from the field. I knocked you in front of your brothers. you know. And so I took you, you're in a palace, you're a prince, and everything else. And so God made a covenant with him, a promise, and so it made David quiet, because he was in his feeling, but I guess he okay, because God gave him some great. And also God said, I'm going to make your name great. I'm going to make your name great. And then the greatest men that's on earth, you're going to stand next to him. You know, so that's what God said. God said, I'm going to make your name great. And the greatest men that they have now on earth, you're going to stand next to. So don't worry about, you being a king and thinking you're not going to be acknowledged. God going to make your name great. He going to make people know who you are. you know and so he don't have to worry about, because he's gonna be a new king. He waited for 20 years. And also, God said in no 20 years, wherever you went, I was with you. You're running for something, I was with you. You're running from your enemies, I was with you. You were living in them caves, I was with you. I was with you wherever you went. I had to protect you up until the time for you to get on that throne, but to get in front of protecting my people. So God was with him through 20 years. And he probably didn't even know. He ain't probably didn't even know that God was with him that whole time. His hard time, his struggles, his mistake, and everything. God was right there. God said, I went everywhere you went, I was there. So that's all I have for you today. Y'all have a blessed and safe night, and I see y'all in the next video.